Welcome to the Mick Dark Horror Series. Lights out. Good. Here we go.
The town of Brightwood is not really much of a town. Hell, the most modern thing about it is the IHOP on 23rd Street, and even that place looks like it was taken out of a 60s magazine. It's not that companies and developers haven't tried to move in on the territory. The woods surrounding the town provide exquisite scenery, and the lumber is definitely abundant, but any business that tries to move in often moves out. I like to think of Brightwood as a trap of sorts, the kind used to catch raccoons or possums. Looks nice and inviting from the outside. Quaint little houses and hotels, warm country-style cooking, and nature literally all around. But once you step in, snap! That metal door swings shut behind and there's no way out. Because of this, our population has stayed at a steady 1,483 since, well, forever. Sure, people die. Houses open up. Then some sorry bastard moves right in and snap, another trapped animal. The reason people can't leave is a creature that a lot of folks refer to as the Brightwood demon. Back in the settling days, the sorry family that settled this valley pitched their tent right here in Brightwood. Supposedly, according to local legend, the creature didn't start attacking until the town reached a certain size. Then, we were invading its territory. Started out with a couple of barnyard animal carcasses, torn to shreds and left strewn out in the fields. It was a sport kill, as no intestines, blood, or meat was missing from the things. Then the killings were upgraded to people. Lumberjacks, hikers, tourists, you name it, and the thing killed it. Some say you could even be out back in your garden and the thing would snatch you. It always left the bodies out for display, and it was never seen by anyone still alive. Anyone other than me, of course. I've been the sheriff since 1989 after my father passed. We only have a few of us on the force, me, Stephen, and Brandon. Stephen mostly handles calls and dispatch. Brandon was still wet around the ears but had heart. Then there was me, who was basically born for this job. As far back as our history books go, a Washington was always sheriff, going down the generations as the centuries pass, finally ending on me. I won't complain, though. I probably see the most excitement out of anybody in town. The excitement being a few drunken brawls here, a domestic dispute there, and of course, teenage vandalism. I can't recall ever having to lock someone up for more than a night, though. People in Brightwood kept to themselves. More concerning matters to contemplate than if your neighbor was dumping their garbage in your bin. It all started with the call. It came in around 10:36 p.m.
Brian? You there, Sheriff?
Stephen's voice crackled through the radio of my patrol car. I'd been sitting outside the IHOP, chewing away at a plate of bacon, eggs, and flapjacks, my thermos full of hot, fresh coffee. I finished chewing and reached over to my walkie. "I'm here. What's going on?" I took a swig of my coffee and awaited his response. After a moment of silence, I hit the button to radio again when Stephen cut me off.
It's the Burton farm, Brian. Something about a home intrusion.
His voice sounded puzzled, and I understood why. Home intrusions were a fantasy in Brightwood. Nearly every home housing some kind of firearm. I sniffled and wiped the coffee off my mustache with a napkin. "You sending Brandon?" I asked as I turned the key in the ignition and flipped the switch to turn on my flashing lights.
He's on the way, Sheriff, but there's one more thing.
Stephen was holding something back, and I could sense the unease in his voice. "What's that?" "Spit it out, son. I don't have all day." I pulled out of the parking lot and turned on the siren. I was maybe a couple blocks from the Burton farm, and at this time of night I could get there without having to worry about other cars or pedestrians. When the sun set, everyone stayed indoors, no matter what.
The voice. The person who called in. They said they did it.
I swerved a bit to avoid a raccoon chewing on something in the middle of the road, and managed to spill hot coffee over my shirt.
Oh, fuck. God damn it. What did you say, Steven? I don't think I heard you quite right. Did you say the perpetrator is the one who called it in?
I mopped at the coffee stain with a napkin, cursing under my breath.
Fuck.
It was going to be a long night.
Fuck.
That's right, sir.
I looked at the radio in silence, not really sure how to respond. This was definitely something that never happened in Brightwood. Rounding the corner, I could see Brandon's flashing red and blue lights illuminating the Burton farmhouse. The driver's side door to his patrol car was wide open, and so was the front door to the house.
Goddamn rookie.
I muttered as I pulled up alongside his car. The house was a 2-floor ranch-style building, complete with a wraparound porch. The farm itself is where Brightwood got a majority of its produce, and the family was well respected and liked by all residents of the town. All but one, anyway. I grunted as I pulled myself out of the car, heaving up my belt as I stood up straight. Reaching back in, I plucked my sheriff's hat from the dash and planted it on my head. I checked to make sure my revolver was safely tucked away in my belt harness, then slowly proceeded up the path to the house. It was a chilly night, but something in the air felt wrong. I glanced around me, taking in the nearby barn and farmyard, and its lack of animals. In the distance, I could see the emerald darkness of the pine trees of the Brightwood forest lining the south side of the farm. The pine needles seemed to glow in the moonlight. My hand drifted to the holster on my hip, and the red flags in my brain started to flare up. Something wasn't right. It was too quiet. No hooting of owls, no forest critters scrounging for food. Not even crickets. I flipped up the strap of the holster and rested my finger on the handle of the gun as I approached the porch. There, sparkling in the flash of the red and blue lights, was a trail of crimson blood leading into the house. It pooled and stained the wooden porch, and droplets of the ichor dripped down the wooden steps and onto the dirt path. The hairs on my neck stood on end at the scene, and I pulled the gun fully out of its holster. It was probably the first time in years I'd ever had to draw it. If only I could have stayed that way. Carefully, I stepped around the blackening pools and up onto the porch. I couldn't hear any movement inside, and from my viewpoint, I could see the trail of blood leading off to the right. Slowly, clutching my gun in both hands, I crept into the house. No lights were on, and the only light was that of the cars outside. Using my left hand, I reached to the left side of my belt and pulled out a long flashlight. The smell was intense and almost nauseating. The blood seeped into every wooden surface I could see. The coppery scent of death was one that I was familiar with, but never within a home. The trail led through a well-furnished living room and into an area that looked like a dining room. I shone my light up the stairs leading to the next floor and saw nothing but family photos and carpeted floor. I stepped carefully, avoiding the blood as much as I could, as I approached its source. My hands were sweating, and the grip I had on the gun was loose. I tried to readjust my grip, noticing then that I was shaking. The light of the flashlight was jerking at odd angles across the walls and floor. As I advanced into the dining room, my heart sank. Every inch, every corner, every goddamn surface was coated in blood. There, laying sprawled out on the dining table, was Brandon. His dead eyes shone in the beam of my flashlight, and his head was angled back to look at me as he lay flat on the table. His throat was ripped apart so deeply that his head clung on with only a few strands of tendons and nerves. His chest and stomach were torn open like a Thanksgiving turkey. His organs and flesh ripped apart and thrown around the room. I stumbled back, slipping slightly in the blood as I stifled a gag. I reached up with my left hand to radio into the station when the sound of movement upstairs caught my attention. I wasn't alone in the house, and maybe there was time to save the Burtons. Glancing one last time at Brandon, muttering a silent prayer for the boy, I turned back the way I came. There was no point avoiding the blood now. It coated my shoes, and there wasn't time to waste. I came back to the entrance and turned to face the stairs. My flashlight traced over something dark and hairy as it shone over the second-floor landing. I blinked startled and not sure if I was seeing things. Did the Burtons have a dog? As I slowly climbed the steps, my mind went back to the stories I was told as a child, those horrible stories of the demon that would snatch me away if I misbehaved or stayed out too late. As I grew older, I just assumed the beast was a large grizzly or maybe a pack of wolves. There couldn't be a demon lurking in the woods. Could there? At the top of the stairs, I paused and shone my flashlight down the hall towards where the black figure had run. The hall was long and narrow, leading to 3 doors, one on the left, one on the right, and one straight ahead. I could see smeared bloody handprints dragging from the room on the left. A few of the pictures that hung on that wall were tilted, some having fallen and shattered on the floor. I could strangely feel the beating of my heart pounding through my entire body, the blood pumping and coursing through my veins as my adrenaline spiked. I looked back the other way, to the right, and saw a shorter hallway with 2 doors on either side. These doors were closed, and there seemed to be no disturbance on that side. Taking in a deep, quiet breath, I moved into the longer hallway, being careful to avoid the broken glass that littered the floor. My shoes left bloody footprints on the carpet behind me. As I approached the door on the left, I could hear what sounded like grunting coming from the door straight ahead. That door was closed and seemed perfectly normal compared to the other 2 in the hall. Gathering my courage, I quickly swooped around the corner, gun aimed, and surveyed the room on the left. The scene was that of a nightmare. Tattered drapes, broken furniture, and blood. So much blood. The room seemed to have belonged to a child, possibly 2. There was a bunk bed that lay in a crumpled heap against the far wall. The window curtains were torn and shredded, flapping in the breeze coming through the open window. I could see parts of a body, or bodies, thrown about the room. I swallowed back vomit as I saw the arm dangling from the ceiling fan. The fan was moving slowly, and the hand waved at me in an endless loop. Blood dripped from the tips of its fingers. As I was about to step back into the hallway, I felt a gush of air fly behind me, and I felt the brush of fur caress my back. An unnerving shudder slithered up my back as I turned around quickly, trying to catch sight of whatever it was. I could hear a door at the other end of the hall slam, and the door that was once closed was now wide open. I could see even from the hall that this room was much like the previous one. Blood coated the walls and floor like a sticky, runny paint. I could see 2 pairs of feet at the edge of the bed. The feet weren't attached to any legs. I turned my attention away from the gruesome scene and peered back down the hall. The door on the left at the far end was now open, and I could see a shadow of movement being cast along the hallway floor. The pounding of my heart was now so intense, I could hear nothing else. My ears rang with the beating, and the hand that was holding the gun was shaking so violently, I feared I would drop it. Gathering the ounce of courage I still had left, I launched myself down the hall, hoping to catch the perpetrator off guard. It would be better if I surprised him before he surprised me. I slammed into the door frame and screamed, "Freeze! Brightwood, pull it!" My voice wilted and died in my throat. Standing before me, hunched over as to not smash through the ceiling, was a creature I had never seen before, or even believed could exist. It was straight out of an awful nightmare, or from the deepest pit in hell. Its entire body was coated in thick black fur. It stood on 2 legs that resembled that of a wolf's or dog's. It had long muscular arms that ended in hands with 5 fingers. Each finger held a long black claw, each dripping in thick scarlet blood. It had turned to face me when I entered, and its face. God, its face. It was shaped much like snakes, a rounded muzzle with 2 slots for a nose, a long, thick forked tongue dangling from its maw, and rows of razor-sharp teeth smiled back at me. Its eyes were like cats, large and slim, and glowing a menacing green. It had no ears, or none I could see. For a moment long enough for my heart to produce one singular beat, we stared at one another, its claws sharp, my gun aimed. Then it launched at me, releasing a hissing-like yowl from its depths. The gun fired one stray bullet that launched into the far wall behind the thing, and then it was smacked out of my hand. I was rammed into the other door in the hall and felt my skull collide with the wood. I was dazed, my eyes spinning in my head as I tried to focus on the thing pinning me. I couldn't feel the floor under my feet, and knew it had raised me into the air. I could smell its putrid breath, a mixture of blood and flesh. The hot air poured over my face, and I struggled to breathe.
You believe now.
The thing cackled, its voice like a million cats being torn to shreds. That was the thing that had called me here. It wanted to be seen, wanted to be believed. Before it tore me apart. Before I could utter a response, I felt a piercing pain in my abdomen. Something spilled over my dangling shoes, and I could hear a plop as something fell to the floor. Blood rose up my throat and spilled out of my lips. I could feel my lungs beginning to fill with blood. And the thing smiled. It dropped me like a sack of bricks, made its way back into the room it had been in. It smiled that awful grin one last time, and smashed through the window and out into the night. I lay, surrounded by my own blood and intestines. With every gasp for air came a mouthful of blood. All I could think of were the events leading up to this moment, leading up to my death. The IHOP, the call, the abandoned cruiser outside, Brandon's destroyed corpse, the dead children, their dead parents, and then me. Shakily I reached with a trembling hand up to the walkie on my shoulder. I had to warn them, tell someone. The demon we had all been told stories about was real, and it wasn't going to stop killing until every last one of us was dead and rotting. Bullets won't stop it. Hell, I don't think anything can. It was unnatural. It was the solid form of pure evil. Clicking the button on the walkie, I choked on my blood as I tried to speak.
Sheriff? What's happening? Are you okay?
Stephen's concerned voice echoed out of the walkie. The energy was draining from my body, and I knew I didn't have much time to explain. Stephen would want to come over here, and would likely die like the rest of us. If I could just warn him, tell him to round up as many people as he can, and get the hell out of Dodge.
Stephen! Run!
I choked out, and my hand fell from the walkie. I looked out of the window that the creature smashed out of, seeing the distant glistening stars above the trees of the Brightwood forest. I was the only person alive to see the demon, but that wasn't going to be for much longer. The only thing I can hear is the sound of distant screams.
Case number 40157J, Paranormal Research Division. Confiscated from Cairo Police Department on 3rd August 2020. Journal entries from Canadian-American researcher Stephen K. Sims. Journal discovered in descending passageway near entrance to Pyramid of Khufu, Egypt. Case status: open. Dr. Sims research log entry 3rd July 2020, 3:28 p.m.
مرحبا، أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم في بلدكم التالي مصر. أتمنى لكم إقامة سعيدة ومدرسة.
I've arrived at Cairo International Airport and will be making my way to the Pyramids of Giza investigating reports from a former assistant whom, for reasons I will be documenting later, will not be named. On a recent study of the Great Pyramid or the Khufu Pyramid, his team discovered what may be a small entranceway to a grander part of the pyramid yet undiscovered. When his team asked to conduct additional research, they were met with a good deal of negativity and asked to move on. I will be resuming this discovery. 5:46 p.m. After a taxi ride that seemed like an eternity, I've arrived at my hotel. I can see the pyramids from my window. Certainly a sight. I plan on making my way to speak with my contact after the festivities on the grounds subside. 7:45 p.m. The anticipation is starting to build as I watch people filter out of the area. If done properly and stealthily enough, the find of the century, or the millennium, will be unearthed. 8:34 p.m. The light show is actually better than expected as they close things down for the day. Makes me wish I was down with the people. The only issue with this is the people. 8:57 p.m. All festivities seem to have ended and there are very few people. I will now be making my way to meet with my contact. 9:42 p.m. Success. The pyramid grounds are mine to roam and explore. My contact, which will also go unnamed, was able to sneak me in without his co-workers noticing. The security guards here are notorious for giving tourists special tours or show them secret rooms for extra money. I was lucky enough to find an especially greedy one who was thrilled at the amount I offered for this opportunity to research alone at night. I believe it will be the first time anyone has truly done this.
Paranormal Research Division entry. Subject Stephen K. Sims. Contact has been disabled.
9:49 p.m. I've worked my way down a good portion of the descending passageway. I wasn't expecting how small the passageway would be. I almost felt like I was going to slip several times, as the ground didn't exactly grip my boots. Awkwardly smooth ground to walk on and going downhill no less. I've stopped and am facing a decision. There's somewhat of a fork in the road. I could either continue descending down the corridor or ascend towards what's called the Grand Gallery, which is the largest room in the pyramid. This is where the supposed entryway was discovered. I have all night. I think I'll descend first. The creepiest stuff is always in the basement, right? 10:12 p.m. Okay, I didn't realize how long of a walk that would be. After nearly slipping only a half a dozen times this time, I made it to what the map says is the subterranean chamber. I really do hate the echo in this place. I swore I heard voices from the blackness that I came from. Clearly ghosts, but I wish they'd stop. Kidding, of course. Isn't that very scientific of me? 10:21 p.m. Walked around down here for a few minutes. I'm a little disheartened to see how little there is to see. It's all just barren walls and rock. No mummies, no artifacts, not even a hieroglyphic. Of course, all of those items are now housed in the museum, but as a tourist attraction, you'd think they'd give the place a little more flair. 10:24 p.m. Incident. A loud rumbling was heard at 10:23 p.m. that seemed to course through the entirety of the pyramid. The rumbling was not only heard, but felt. Duration? 34 seconds. Unexplained. 10:27 p.m. I am now regretting my decision to descend to the chambers first. Not only was it a long walk down, it will be an even longer walk up, not to mention tiring. 11:14 p.m. I am now back at the fork in the road. There are wood planks here for me to sit and rest after the uphill hike. I will be resting and hydrating for a few moments. (11:16 p.m.) Incident. A screeching noise was heard at 11:16 p.m. from deep inside the ascending passageway. I nearly choked on my water to rush grabbing my journal to notate. The sound was not a biological sound, more metal on metal. As far as I know, I'm alone, though this has piqued my interest as well as my adrenaline. Duration 4 seconds. Again, unexplained. 11:20 p.m. I was going to make this journal entry when I reached the Grand Gallery, but I found myself staring into the darkness of the ascending passageway for several minutes. I'm not one to believe in curses, ghosts, or revived mummies, but the screeching noise has activated a sense of fear I've never felt before. I must move past my personal emotions for the good of discovery. 11:29 p.m. I've reached the Grand Hall. To say it is grand is in fact a huge overstatement. While it's clearly bigger than the corridors to get here, it's still underwhelming. Before I investigate the mysterious hidden passageway, I think I'll sneak a quick look in the King's Chamber, where the Pharaoh was found. 11:36 p.m. A sarcophagus. That's all that was in the King's Chamber. Again, no markings, no items of grandeur. When I get home, I'm going to have to phone those documentary makers and... Incident. In the middle of writing this entry, I heard a sort of chanting coming from the Grand Hall which I came from. It was not a chanting that I've heard before among the many cultures I've encountered or have seen on TV. It was faint but audible. That feeling of fear has washed over me again. I will regain my bearings and I will move to investigate. 11:45 p.m. I've re-entered the Grand Hall. I have also located the supposed entryway my associate reported to me. It was exactly where he said it was. It's quite a bit smaller than reported. I see why it was missed for all of these decades. It's hard to tell, but peering my flashlight through, it does seem to go on a ways. Saying it's an entryway, though, is fairly inaccurate, at least for a person. I will document with pictures.
Paranormal Research Division entry. Memory card retrieved from Nikon model D810. Included 7 still photos of entryway located in file C for case number 40157J.
11:52 p.m. I've spent the last few minutes trying to figure out a way to maneuver myself through. I'm about 23 cheeseburgers too large. I might end up hurting myself getting through, but I am determined. 11:54 p.m. Incident. That loud rumbling returned at 11:53 p.m. Duration, 14 seconds. Again, unexplained. 11:59 p.m. Success. I have made it through. I can barely contain my excitement to write this. My left arm was almost twisted 360 degrees, but I made it. Although, as I'm writing, my excitement is dwindling as I realize I'm in a small dark room, approximately 5 by 5 feet. There are no other hallways or tunnels. I suppose it's a new find that has never been documented, but 12:01 a.m. March 8th, 2020. Incident. I almost have no words. My last entry was cut short due to making sure this was a separate one, and note it as more important. In writing previous entry, I leaned against the wall and something I've only seen in movies. The wall opened up, and I fell to the floor in a completely separate room. As I looked back, the door closed back up by itself. The door, made entirely out of stone, seemed to move like a mechanical door I have yet to explore. The hallway seems far more vast and larger than the explored areas of the pyramid, almost as if this was the main area. 12:09 a.m. Previous entry is incorrect. The area I was in was the hallway to the main area. I am almost at a loss of words. What I have discovered is extraordinary. I can only describe it as an arena, perhaps a stage. Cascading stone seats in a circle around the flat stage area. In the middle of the stage is a large stone tablet. Could this be a sacrificial area? Perhaps a mummification spot? Although why all of the seats?
Paranormal Research Division entry 29 photos of arena retrieved from memory card in file C.
12:29 a.m. In researching my new find, I almost forgot to make an entry. I am now convinced that this is a public sacrificial chamber. The arena spiders off into 6 corridors. I will be investigating each one. "12:38 a.m. Incident. The screeching sound returned. Duration 47 seconds. Unexplained. It was much louder this time. It seemed to come from all directions. As I began walking down what I have dubbed Corridor A, it was far more intense than the previous incident. This may sound strange, but the screech sounded angry, almost as if it was unhappy with my presence. 12:42 a.m. Corridor A seems to branch off into other corridors and rooms. Most rooms are empty, but the third room on the right was concerning. 5 feet in, I nearly fell into a seemingly endless drop. What could this drop be for? 12:54 a.m. Incident. I don't know what to say. I will try to put this into words. A shadow, a silhouette, gave chase. As a scientist, I cannot report seeing a ghost. I can't. There may be people living in the pyramid, obviously not ancient Egyptians, but modern-day people that secretly live here. I was able to elude the form. I call it a silhouette because it had no features. Just a black human form. Large, maybe 7 feet tall, broad physique, no eyes, no mouth. I saw it down the hall and it gave chase. No audible footsteps, now that I'm recollecting. I ran around several corners and through many corridors, and now I am lost, and I am deep in the maze that I've gotten myself into. 1:01 a.m. The rumbling returned. I'm too scared out of my mind to report lengths of time and how it's unexplained. I've tucked myself in a corner and am building the courage to leave. I need to get out. 1:08 a.m. The screeching. It returned, still mad. Mad at me, I don't know. I was just curious. 1:12 a.m. I'm finding my journal entries to be soothing. Recollecting what's going on is somehow making me feel better, almost as if it's going to be seen. 1:15 a.m. The figure. It walked past me. No noise. I could tell it was angry. It walked with a purpose now. I know I was not seeing things. I ran in the opposite direction once it was out of view. 1:18 a.m. Oh, no. No, 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 no. It's staring at me. It's staring at me. It's across the hall. And it's staring at me. I'm trying to write this while keeping an eye on it. Sloppy handwriting. It's been still for a good minute. It's real.
Paranormal Research Division entry. The above entry was illegible. Translated to the best of our abilities.
"1:24 p.m. It left. After what felt like forever of a motionless stare, it left. It left slowly, almost daring me to stay. I don't want that dare. I want to do what it wants. I want to leave. 1:27 a.m. The black void. In so many directions, I'm surrounded. No way out. No hope. No hope. No sanity.
Paranormal Research Division entry. Subject Stephen K. Sims no longer provides timestamps.
The rumbling. The screeching. My nemesis. He taunts me. I hear him now. He speaks. Not with words, but he speaks. My predator is stronger than me, more dominating than me, more evil than me. I can't. He's solid. I hit him. I saw him around a corner. I punched. Its face. Solid. It didn't react. Did not move. My hand is broken. Fear keeps the pain away.
Paranormal Research Division entry. Blood found soaked into several pages around this one. DNA identified as Dr. Stephen K. Sims.
Darkness. Can't see me. He's darker than the darkness. I can see him. Hand is starting to hurt. Why? Just end this.
Paranormal Research Division entry. All entries onward mostly illegible. Translated to the best of our abilities.
Somewhere out there is my death, my release from this life. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in an afterlife. Will I black out into nothingness? Is that the afterlife? Nothing. That's what I consider my nemesis. He's a void in the darkness, as if he's nothing. I will soon be nothing as well. Pain. Everywhere. Nemesis charged, hit me. I flew almost 10 feet, barely able to write. Stood
over me. Left. He was amused. He didn't want me to die. Yet. Maddening. I will kill him. I will kill. Kill! Chanting, I hear the chanting again. Would be beautiful, if not for the suffering. Would you know me if you saw me? Would you care? I have to write. I have to keep writing. He doesn't bother me when I'm writing. This is my saving grace. This is my sanity. This is me. Cold. Cold. Egypt can't be cold. Laying in blood. No recourse. It's dragging me. Can still write. Crushed ankle, he's so strong. Tight grip. I'm the star. I'm the star of the show. They love me here. They all came out to see me. They love me. I am the star.
Paranormal Research Division entry. Bottom part of page crumpled and torn. No additional entries. Additional information. Journal of Stephen K. Sims located in File A. Nikon Model D810 located in File B. Memory card retrieved from Nikon Model D810 located in File C. All above items were found at entrance of Pyramid of Khufu at 6:56 a.m. 3rd August 2020 by security. Subject of case number 40157J not recovered. End report.
I am the star. It was 6 hours or so since his last stop at the gas station. But finally Ted arrived. He'd been working and saving for a couple of years for this vacation, and he stepped out of his car with a grin. He was finally home. Not his real home, mind you. His real home was back in South Dakota. Here in Maine, just a little north of Sebago Lake, was where he felt most comfortable. He spent many summers here in his childhood. The cabin, which was leased out by his father's landlord, Charlie, was a 2-story beauty set in the woods roughly 10 minutes away from the sandy shore of the water. Grabbing most of his stuff from the trunk of his car, he walked up to the heavy wooden door, pushing the key into the hole. He bumped hard into the unmoving portal. The continuous heating and cooling of the old cabin throughout the seasons must have caused the door to stick. So he pushed harder, and it still did not budge. Turning the key back and forth a few times, he finally booted it in hard with a resounding crack. He stepped in the musty living room to see that the door had been barred from inside. This concerned him. He went through the house, turning lights on, looking for anyone who might be in there. The living room and kitchen were spotless, and the hallways leading to the up and downstairs were undisturbed as well. He opened the door to the basement and pulled the string to the light at the top of the stairs. Nothing. As he got out his phone to turn the flashlight app on, He glanced down into the dark void. A shiver ran down his spine. It looked threatening and sad. The light switched on, and he slowly went down the creaking wood steps. Each step was like the bass to the solo his heart was giving. Hot sweat beaded down his cool face as he reached the landing. Something moved and made him nearly jump out of his skin. He reached for the light to the left of the steps and clicked it on, painting the concrete walls and earlier floor with light. Ted looked where the noise had come from. On the wall under the stairs was some gardening equipment, and a rake had fallen over. Feeling incredibly foolish, yet relieved, he looked around. There was lots of old hunting and trapping gear, which made sense being in the middle of nature. On the right side of the basement, where the dirt had not been packed down, was some uninteresting luggage. And to the front, where the stairs came down, was just a washing machine and dryer. Satisfied, he turned off the light and went back upstairs. Reaching the top, he shut the door, letting the rest of his fear run out of him. He checked the bathroom and downstairs bedroom, and found nothing. The top floor was 2 bedrooms, which were both spotless, and not even that musty. Ted wasn't one to dwell on things, so he just left it to the owner being an eccentric. Feeling hungry, he went back down to his car. The cooler in the back seat had a 6-pack of PBR, personal favorite from his teen years, and stuff for sandwiches. Closing the door, he took a moment to admire the land as the sun began to set. The trees in the surrounding woods were bright orange, with a contrasting darkness, both blending together to make everything look like it was on fire. Thinking back to his childhood here, he remembered his dad dropping the first pile of logs into the fire pit to the south of the cabin. With a clunk, he'd stand up straight, put his hand on Ted, and proclaim, "This is the magic hour. Anything can happen, from elves visiting from the trees to the spirits of the Saco River coming to enact the curse," he'd say with a chuckle. Ted would feel spooky excitement run through him for the rest of the night, and the years had taken that. He sighed and went back inside. He walked into the kitchen, cooler in hand, and stopped. The fridge and all the cupboards were open, and then the smell hit him. It was like rotting flesh, and he almost threw up. Moving towards the fridge, he saw that the shelves had old food on them. How old it was, or even what it had been, he didn't know. Wait, were all the doors open when he walked in before? Surely he would have noticed, at least of that horrid stench. He grabbed some garbage bags from under the sink and began to dump the fridge contents. He couldn't believe the old man would just leave this stuff here for so long. It had to be pushing 70 now. Probably didn't give a rat's ass. After about 20 minutes of cleaning the fridge, the smell had died down and he could finally stomach a sandwich. He made his favorite triple roast beef and cheese, sat down on the couch to listen to the radio. Opening a beer, he flipped it on, hearing nothing but static. He turned past a few scratchy country stations. Finally found one with classic rock. AC/DC's Back in Black was playing when he downed his beer in 2, and then got up for another one. Coming back to the living room, the station cut out. It was nothing but static at first, but then he could hear, clearly, a girl's voice. Sounded like she was crying, or pleading, and he made out the words. The static cut back in again, and the song Bad to the Bone by George Thorogood took its place. Ted was beginning to get nervous. He ultimately chalked it up to a strange coincidence, but with the sun barely visible now, and being by himself, his imagination was starting to get to him. He took a deep breath and a deep swig, and went through his bags to get the Sudoku he did when he had free time. He rifled through it, but realized it was in his passenger seat. He got up and opened the door, and his heart had leapt from his chest as he rushed back behind the door. In his front seat was a silhouette, just staring at him. He didn't get a great look, but it was definitely a woman with dark hair. He looked next to the wood stove, grabbed the small metal shovel on its wooden holder. Slowly opening the front door, he looked again to the empty car. He knew there was someone in there just a second ago. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he didn't feel comfortable here anymore. He packed his belongings back into his bags, and with a careful glance, he went out to his car. He put his stuff in the back seat and got in to start it. Only his fingers didn't meet his keys. He looked over, and sure enough, they were not in the ignition. "Fuck!" he yelled in frustration. Now, he would have to get a hold of the police and report it. Some vacation. He pulled the phone out of his pocket and went to dial the number for the local police when he noticed the smell. It smelled exactly like the rancid food he threw away. To the sounds of his own gagging, he heard something else from behind him. Funny sort of cracking noise, like that of a fistful of grass being pulled from the ground. He looked in his rearview mirror, saw something that made his skin crawl. It was the woman again. Her dark hair about shoulder length glistened with something moist. One of her eyes hung limply from her dark, bloody socket. Chunks of meat were missing from her face, and where her jaw should have been, a gaping hole ripped from her cheek down her neck, and her tongue flapped nauseatingly as if she were trying to speak. His scream tore through his throat in a pitch he didn't know he could hit, and in a flurry of motion, he opened the door, ran back inside, and slammed the door shut. The whole thing felt like somebody was moving his body for him, and he was watching it all unfold from outside of himself. Slowly, he slumped to the ground against the door, his breathing erratic and his hands around his knees, as he felt like he was gaining control again. His entire body erupted in shakes. He began to get hold of himself and started to stand up. Radio was playing something by Aerosmith, and he went to the couch. Ted pulled out his cell phone to call the police and noticed it was out of service. "Figures," he said as he set it on the end table. He got up and locked the door, putting a chair against the knob for good measure. He made sure all the windows were shut and locked and went upstairs to his old bedroom. He wasn't going to go to sleep, not after that. But being locked in the room upstairs made him feel a lot better about the whole thing. He kept the light on as he got into bed. There was another radio up here, and he tuned it on to a nightly talk show. They were going on about football. Not that he cared what the subject was. The voices just made him feel a hell of a lot better. After a while of his mind still racing, he began to grow bored, which turned into curiosity. His instincts knew better, but he looked out the window into the darkness anyway. The moon didn't provide a lot of light, and he had to squint for a few minutes. The trees swayed gently back and forth, and his car was empty. He saw nothing in the still night. This made him feel better. Maybe the whole thing was just nonsense. He still couldn't talk himself out of what he saw, but it had been quiet for a while. Maybe he was just imagining it. He trailed off in his mind as he saw a figure emerge from the woods. It was slim, and when it walked, it was in a jerking motion, like it had no feet, and it just gazed up at him. Ted reared away from the window and thought briefly about going down to get something as a weapon, but there was no way in hell he was going to leave this room. He was just gonna sit up here and wait for the morning, then run to the nearest house. He thought, as the power went out. His pulse raced as the dark and quiet set in, almost as perfect as the woods during the magic hour. He swallowed dryly in his throat as he listened to anything coming from downstairs or outside. Tick, tick, tick. He heard the sound of something dripping, coming from the bathroom to the left of the room he was in, and the door was slightly open. He turned on his flashlight and slowly turned to it. He opened the door all the way, and the light revealed the tub. The shower curtain was closed. He could hear the steady ticking coming from it. He moved forward to push the curtain aside, then thought better of it and pulled away as the curtain ripped open from the other side. There was an old, fat man in the full tub full of water, looking at Ted with hatred. That was when Ted recognized him as the landlord, Charlie. The swollen body rose out of the water and moved in an unnatural way towards him, falling as he reached a large leg over the edge of the tub. Ted backed out of there and out of the bedroom to the downstairs, which he nearly tumbled down as the lights came back on. He grabbed a fire poker and sat on the couch shivering, just waiting for the waterlogged corpse to come down after him. Nothing came. He crept back up the stairs, moving slowly, ready to bash it in with his iron weapon. At the top, he looked in the bedroom. There was nothing. But he still heard the tick, tick, tick coming from the bathroom. Slowly, he moved to the open door. Water flooded the ground, but the curtain was shut. He moved the tip to the fabric and swung it open to reveal nothing. There was no body or even any water. The faucet was just open enough to allow a stream of droplets to tap the drain. He made his way back downstairs to the couch.
I'm going crazy,
he thought.
I'm losing my mind.
He gently rocked himself back and forth when he heard the door creak open. Suddenly, he remembered he left the back door unlocked. He jerked his head down the hall and saw the dark shape of the woman. He could hear her joints crack with every move she made, and she made a disturbing noise from the hole in her neck, her flailing tongue punctuating every noise with a moist smack. Every step let out a sickening thud from her feetless legs. She was coming closer. Panicked, he turned to run out the front door only to find it blocked by the former landlord. With an angry sneer, he charged at Ted. Ted stabbed the poker into his stomach with a wet squelch, and like a hole in a barrel, dark water began pouring out. Ted's way out was blocked. He ran to the basement stairs, locking the door behind him, quickly made his way to the bottom, and turned on the light. He was now royally screwed and weaponless. He went over to the hunting equipment. Most of it was just basic supplies, nothing of any real use. But now he noticed the rust color on the bear traps was also on the earthen floor. The wavy patterns looked like it made its way back to the darker part of the ground. He followed it, and as he bent down, that's when he heard a creak from the other side of the room. His head moved over to the lower outside window from the back. It was open, and pushing through it was the jawless woman. She crawled through and fell limply to the floor, unmoving for a moment. Then, in a grotesque display of rigor mortis consumed limbs, she stood up and walked over to him. He had nowhere to go. Above, he could hear Charlie slamming against the door, demanding entrance. Slowly, the horror set in as she was now 5 feet away. Her hands came up, and he closed his eyes, letting out a whimper, knowing this was the end. Cold, stiff hands made their way on either side of his face, and he saw a vision in his head. A woman was being held in the basement. She tried to run, so someone broke her ankles using bear traps, and then cut them off with a saw when they became infected. Then the scene changed to her begging for food. She had not eaten in a while and was looking gaunt. A man was tired of hearing this, so he ripped her jaw right from her, killing her. The man was Charlie. Suddenly, he snapped back to reality, and the woman was nowhere to be seen. Banging could still be heard from above, and he looked down at the uneven earth. Grabbing a shovel, he began to dig. The banging became even more desperate as only about a foot down, he saw the decaying face of the woman. All at once, the banging stopped. He finally lost his supper from the smell and went hesitantly to the top. Charlie was nowhere to be seen. All was quiet. He ran to the front door and threw it open. The cold, fresh air felt amazing, and he reached into his pocket for his phone. He found his keys, not thinking twice. He got into his car and drove away. The next day, police and a crime scene unit were all over the property. They determined Charlie had kidnapped a young woman named Carol Burns, and eventually, when he got bored of her, he found new interesting ways to torture her, eventually killing her. They weren't sure how Charlie's body made its way into the well in the back of the house, so it was labeled a suicide. Ted wasn't found guilty of anything other than being a loony to most of the officers he talked to. They marked the case closed, and all loose ends had been tied. All except the small, round, bloody marks leading from the back door to the basement.
Water fell through the holes in the ceiling, splattering heavily into the swollen, saturated carpets. The young girl moved slowly through the room, filthy dampness seeping up around her small trainers. She could feel it leaking through her shoes and into her socks. Graffiti lined the walls of the house, some of it childish scrawling, some of it quite artful. Some the girl understood, some she didn't. Much of it vulgar. She paused in front of a chipped wall, dominated by the clumsily spray-painted words, "The devil is here and wants to take you away." Even as an 8-year-old, she sniffed dismissively at the spelling. She walked carefully up the stairs. The ceiling here was intact, so the floorboards far more stable. But she still moved with caution. There were lots of exposed nails poking through the woodwork. At the top of the stairs was a small round window, one of the few in the house with the glass still intact. She had to stand on tiptoes to see out. The surface was dirty. She looked out at the flat blankness of the fen landscape, empty, gray countryside scarred with drainage ditches and odd-angled trees, increasingly hidden by dark, encroaching drizzle. The car was down below, parked in front of the house. The girl's mother was still sitting in the driver's seat, head thrown back, face torn away, jaw slack, and gaping, a mouthful of smashed, broken teeth. The inner windows were an explosion of already drying crimson. The girl peered down at her for a while before moving on, closer to the devastating holes in the roof. It was chillier up here, some of the rain falling down through the house turning to spray in the strong drafts. She was only wearing her dungarees and a t-shirt, and held her arms for warmth. She headed towards a door so badly smashed it was hanging from one hinge only, splintered and shattered. She carefully slid past it into a room overlooking the overgrown garden. At the back of the house, with more featureless landscape beyond the crooked and broken fencing, her father, hands bound behind his back and an old rag stuffed and taped into his mouth, was here. He was on the wet, stinking carpet, rain soaking his clothes through. His hair was plastered to his face, almost hiding it. His ankles had been shattered badly, shocking gray bone piercing his leg on one side. Skin was yellow in pain. He lifted his head when he realized she was there. He looked exhausted and in agony, but tried to form words through the muffle of his gag. The girl watched him dispassionately, her arms hanging limply by her sides. One of her fingers rubbed idly at the stitching on her dungarees. He grunted desperately at her for a while, pleading and frantic, twisting his body as he tried to free his arms. Eventually realizing he was getting no response, he slowly looked at her with wide, bewildered eyes. She wrenched a shard of wood from the shattered door. It had a vicious, pointed end. Her palm began to bleed from gripping the sharp wooden edges. He tried talking again as she approached him, trying to make more words around his gag, trying to reason with her eyes. Then he began to scream into the fetid material, balled into his mouth. Crazily, hysterically trying to lunge his body away, eyes bulging at something over her shoulder. The girl could sense there was someone behind her. She knew her father wasn't screaming at her. She took him by the hair and cradled him in the denim against her chest. She stabbed him in the face. It made a dull, meaty sound, and he made a startled, straining grunt. She yanked the stake out and did it again and again, destroying his eyes and his face and his teeth and the meat that made up his personality and his soul, and wrecked his head until the wood was blunted and useless. Her hands were torn to ribbons, rough wooden pins jutting out of her torn soft skin. She paid them little notice at first. She let her father's head go, and his body slumped heavily against the wall. She dropped the stake to the soft floorboards. She turned to the figure behind her. The tall man stepped towards her. He wore an aging suit and a fraying, musty overcoat. His head was split down the center, the ancient wound creating two gray flaps of dried face. Eyes watched her at insectoid angles. She held her bleeding hands out, only now seeming to feel any pain, looking down in despair, her face grimacing into an imminent sob. He opened his arms for her. She embraced him. She was now feeling the pain at her shredded palms and torn fingers.
Grandpa?
She cried at the old man for comfort.
In my tortured ears, there sounds increasingly a nightmare whirring and flapping, and a faint, distant baying, as of some gigantic hound. It is not a dream. It is not, I fear, even madness. For too much had already happened to give me these merciful doubts. St. John is a mangled corpse. I alone know why. And such is my knowledge, that I am about to blow out my brains for fear I shall be mangled in the same way. Down, unlit and illimitable corridors of eldritch fantasy sweeps the black, shapeless nemesis that drives me to self-annihilation. May heaven forgive the folly and morbidity which led us both to so monstrous a fate. Wearied with the commonplace of a prosaic world, where even the joys of romance and adventure soon grow stale, St. John and I had followed enthusiastically every aesthetic and intellectual movement which promised respite from our devastating ennui. The enigmas of the symbolists and the ecstasies of the pre-Raphaelites, all were ours in their time, but each new mood was drained too soon of its diverting novelty and appeal. Only the somber philosophy of the decadence could hold us, and this we found potent only by increasingly gradually the depth and diabolism of our penetrations. Baudelaire and Huysmans were soon exhausted of thrills, till finally there remained for us only the more direct stimuli of unnatural personal experiences and adventures. It was this frightful emotional need which led us eventually to that detestable course, which even in my present fear I mention with shame and timidity, that hideous extremity of human outrage, the abhorred practice of grave robbing.
I cannot reveal the details of our shocking expeditions or catalog, even party the worst of the trophies adorning the nameless museum we prepared in the great stone house where we jointly dwelt, alone and servantless. Our museum was a blasphemous, unthinkable place, where with the satanic taste of neurotic virtuosi, we had assembled a universe of terror and decay to excite our jaded sensibilities. It was a secret room, far, far underground, where huge winged demons carven of basalt and onyx vomited from wide grinning mouths, weird green and orange light, and hidden pneumatic pipes ruffled into kaleidoscope dances of death, the lines of red charnel things, hand in hand, woven in voluminous black hangings. Through these pipes came at will the odors our moods most craved. Sometimes the scent of pale funeral lilies, sometimes the narcotic incense of imagined eastern shrines of the kingly dead, and sometimes, how I shudder to recall it, the frightful, soul-upheaving stenches of the uncovered grave. Around the walls of this repellent chamber were cases of antique mummies, alternating with comely, lifelike bodies perfectly stuffed and cured by the taxidermist's art, and with the headstones snatched from the oldest churchyards of the world. Niches here and there contained skulls of all shapes, and heads preserved in various stages of dissolution. There, one might find the rotting, bald patés of famous noblemen, and the fresh and radiantly golden heads of new buried children. Statues and paintings there were, all of fiendish subjects, and some executed by St. John and myself. A locked portfolio, bound in tanned human skin, held certain unknown and unnameable drawings, which it was rumored Goya had perpetrated but dared not acknowledge. There were nauseous musical instruments, stringed, brass, and woodwind, on which St. John and I sometimes produced dissonances of exquisite morbidity and casodemoniacal ghastliness, whilst in a multitude of inlaid ebony cabinets reposed the most incredible and unimaginable variety of tomb loot ever assembled by human madness and perversity. It is of this loot in particular that I must not speak. Thank God I had the courage to destroy it long before I thought of destroying myself. The predatory excursions on which we collected our unmentionable treasures were always artistically memorable events. We were no vulgar ghouls, but worked only under certain conditions of mood, landscape, environment, weather, season, and moonlight. These pastimes were to us the most exquisite form of aesthetic expression, and we gave their details a fastidious technical care. An inappropriate hour, a jarring lighting effect, or a clumsy manipulation of the damp sod would almost totally destroy for us that ecstatic titillation which followed the exhumation of some ominous, grinning secret of the earth. Our quest for novel scenes in piquant conditions was feverish and insatiate. St. John was always the leader, and it was he who led the way at last to that mocking, that accursed spot, which brought us our hideous and inevitable doom. By what malign fatality were we lured to that terrible Holland churchyard? I think it was the dark rumor and legend, the tales of one buried for 5 centuries, who had himself been a ghoul in his time, and had stolen a potent thing from a mighty sepulchre. I can recall the scenes in these final moments, the pale autumnal moon over the graves, casting long, horrible shadows, the grotesque trees drooping sullenly,
to meet the neglected grass and the crumbling slabs. The vast legions of strangely colossal bats that flew against the moon. The antique ivied church, pointing a huge spectral finger at the livid sky. Phosphorescent insects that dance like death fires under the yews in a distant corner. The odors of mold, vegetation, and less explicable things that mingled feebly with the night wind from over far swamps and seas. And worst of all, the faint, deep-toned baying of some gigantic hound, which we could neither see nor definitely place. As we heard this suggestion of baying, we shuddered, remembering the tales of the peasantry. For he whom we sought had centuries before been found in this self-same spot, torn and mangled by the claws and teeth of some unspeakable beast. I remembered how we delved in this ghoul's grave with our spades, and how we thrilled at the picture of ourselves, the grave, the pale watching moon, the horrible shadows, the grotesque trees, the titanic bats, the antique church, the dancing death fires, the sickening odors, the gently moaning night wind, and the strange, half-heard, directionless baying, of whose objective existence we could scarcely be sure. Then we struck a substance harder than the damp mold, and beheld a rotting oblong box crusted with mineral deposits. From the long undisturbed ground, it was incredibly tough and thick, but so old that we finally pried it open and feasted our eyes on what it held. Much, amazingly much, was left of the object despite the lapse of 500 years. The skeleton, though crushed in places by the jaws of the thing that had killed it, held together with surprising firmness, and we gloated over the clean white skull and its long, firm teeth, and its eyeless sockets that once had glowed with a charnel fever like our own. In the coffin lay an amulet of curious and exotic design, which had apparently been worn around the sleeper's neck. It was the oddly conventionalized figure of a crouching, winged hound or sphinx with a semi-canine face, and was exquisitely carved in antique oriental fashion from a small piece of green jade. The expression on its features was repellent in the extreme, savoring at once of death, bestiality, and malevolence. Around the base was an inscription in characters which neither St. John nor I could identify, and on the bottom, like a maker's seal, was graven a grotesque and formidable skull. Immediately upon beholding this amulet, we knew that we must possess it, that this treasure alone was our logical pelf from the centuried grave. Even had its outlines been unfamiliar, we would have desired it. But as we looked more closely, we saw that it was not wholly unfamiliar. Alien it indeed was to all art and literature, which sane and balanced readers know, but we recognized it as the thing hinted of in the forbidden Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazret, the ghastly sole symbol of the corpse-eating cult of inaccessible Leng in Central Asia. All too well did we trace the sinister lineaments described by the old Arab demonologists. Lineaments, he wrote, drawn from some obscure supernatural manifestation of the souls of those who vexed and gnawed at the dead. Seizing the green jade object, we gave a last glance at the bleached and cavern-eyed face of its owner, and closed up the grave as we found it. As we hastened from that abhorrent spot, the stolen amulet in St. John's pocket, we thought we saw the bats descend in a body to the earth we had so lately rifled, as if seeking for some cursed and unholy nourishment. But the autumn moon shone weak and pale, we could not be sure. So too, as we sailed the next day away from Holland to our home, we thought we heard the faint, distant baying of some gigantic hound in the background. But the autumn wind moaned sad and wan, and we could not be sure. Less than a week after our return to England, strange things began to happen. We lived as recluses, devoid of friends, alone and without servants, in a few rooms of an ancient manor house on a bleak and unfrequented moor, so that our doors were seldom disturbed by the knock of the visitor. Now, however, we were troubled by what seemed to be frequent fumblings in the night, not only around the doors but around the windows also, upper as well as lower. Once we fancied that a large, opaque body darkened the library window when the moon was shining against it. And another time, we thought we heard a whirring or flapping sound not far off. On each occasion, investigation revealed nothing. We began to ascribe the occurrences to imagination alone. That same curiously disturbed imagination which still prolonged in our ears the faint, far baying we thought we heard in the Holland churchyard. The jade amulet now reposed in a niche in our museum, and sometimes we burned strangely scented candles before it. We read much in Alhazred's Necronomicon about its properties, and about the relation of ghouls' souls to the objects it symbolized, and were disturbed by what we read. Then, terror came. On the night of September 24th, I heard a knock at my chamber door. Fancying it St. John's, I bade the knocker enter, but was answered only by a shrill laugh. There was no one in the corridor. When I aroused St. John from his sleep, he professed entire ignorance of the event and became as worried as I. It was that night that the faint, distant baying over the moor became to us a certain and dreaded reality. 4 days later, whilst we were both in the hidden museum, there came a low, cautious scratching at the single door which led to the secret library staircase. Our alarm was now divided, for besides our fear of the unknown, we had always entertained a dread that our grisly collection might be discovered. Extinguishing all lights, we proceeded to the door and threw it suddenly open, whereupon we felt an unaccountable rush of air and heard, as if receding far away, a queer combination of rustling, tittering, and articulate chatter. Whether we were mad, dreaming, or in our senses, we did not try to determine. We only realized, with the blackest of apprehensions, that the apparently disembodied chatter was beyond a doubt in the Dutch language. After that, we lived in growing horror and fascination. Mostly we held to the theory that we were jointly going mad from our life of unnatural excitements, but sometimes it pleased us more to dramatize ourselves as the victims of some creeping and appalling doom. Bizarre manifestations were now too frequent to count. Our lonely house was seemingly alive with the presence of some malign being whose nature we could not guess. And every night that demonic baying rolled over the windswept moor, always louder and louder. On October 29, we found in the soft earth underneath the library window a series of footprints, utterly impossible to describe. They were as baffling as the hordes of great bats which haunted the old manor house in unprecedented and increasing numbers. The horror reached a culmination on November 18, when St. John, walking home after dark from the distant railway station, was seized by some frightful carnivorous thing and torn to ribbons. Screams had reached the house, and I had hastened to the terrible scene in time to hear a whir of wings and see a vague, black, cloudy thing silhouetted against the rising moon. My friend was dying when I spoke to him, and he could not answer coherently. All he could do was to whisper,
"The amulet. That damned thing."
Then he collapsed, an inert mass of mangled flesh. I buried him the next midnight in one of our neglected gardens and mumbled over his body one of the devilish rituals he had loved in life. And as I pronounced the last demonic sentence, I heard afar on the moor the faint baying of some gigantic hound. The moon was up, but I dared not look at it. And when I saw on the dim, lit moor a wide nebulous shadow sweeping from mound to mound, I shut my eyes and threw myself face down upon the ground. When I arose trembling, I know not how much later, I staggered into the house and made shocking obeisance before the enshrined amulet of green jade. Being now afraid to live alone in the ancient house on the moor, I departed on the following day for London, taking with me the amulet after destroying by fire and burial the rest of the impious collection in the museum. But after 3 nights, I heard the baying again, and before a week was over, felt strange eyes upon me whenever it was dark. One evening, as I strolled on Victoria Embankment for some needed air, I saw a black shape obscure one of the reflections of the lamps in the water. A wind stronger than the night wind rushed by, and I knew what had befallen St. John must soon befall me. The next day I carefully wrapped the green jade amulet and sailed for Holland. What mercy I might gain by returning the thing to its silent, sleeping owner I knew not. But I felt that I must at least try any step conceivably logical. What the hound was, and why it pursued me, were questions still vague. But I had first heard the baying in that ancient churchyard, and every subsequent event, including St. John's dying whisper, had served to connect the curse with the stealing of the amulet. Accordingly, I sank into the nethermost abysses of despair, when at the inn in Rotterdam I discovered that thieves had despoiled me of this sole means of salvation. The baying was loud that evening, and in the morning I read of a nameless deed in the vilest quarter of the city. The rabble were in terror, for upon an evil tenement had fallen a red death beyond the foulest previous crime of the neighborhood. In a squalid thieves' den, an entire family had been torn to shreds by an unknown thing which left no trace, and those around had heard all night, above the usual clamor of drunken voices, a faint, deep, insistent note as of a gigantic hound. So, at last, I stood again in that unwholesome churchyard, where a pale winter moon cast hideous shadows, and leafless trees drooped sullenly to meet the withered, frosty grass and cracking slabs, and the ivied church pointing a jeering finger at the unfriendly sky, and the night wind howled maniacally from over frozen swamps and frigid seas. The baying was very faint now, and it ceased altogether as I approached the ancient grave I had once violated, and frightened away an abnormally large horde of bats which had been hovering curiously around it. I know not why I went thither unless to pray, or gibber out insane pleas and apologies to the calm white thing that lay within. But, whatever my reason, I attacked the half-frozen sod with a desperation partly mine and partly that of a dominating will outside myself. Excavation was much easier than I expected, though at one point I encountered a queer interruption when a lean vulture darted down out of the cold sky and pecked frantically at the grave earth until I killed him with a blow of my spade. Finally, I reached the rotting oblong box and removed the damp nitrous cover. This is the last rational act I ever performed, for crouched within that centuried coffin, embraced by a close-packed nightmare retinue of huge, sinewy sleeping bats, was the bony thing my friend and I had robbed, not clean and placid as we had seen it then, but covered with caked blood and shreds of alien flesh and hair, and leering sentiently at me with phosphorescent sockets and sharp, ensanguined fangs, yawning twistedly in mockery of my inevitable doom. And when it gave from those grinning jaws a deep, sardonic bay, as of some gigantic hound, and I saw that it held in its gory, filthy claw the lost and faithful amulet of green jade, I merely screamed and ran away idiotically, my screams soon dissolving into peals of hysterical laughter. Madness rides the starwind, claws and teeth sharpened on centuries of corpses, dripping death astride a bacchanal of bats from night-black ruins of buried temples of Belial. Now, as the baying of that dead, fleshless monstrosity grows louder and louder, and the stealthy whirring and flapping of those accursed web wings circles closer and closer, I shall seek with my revolver the oblivion which is my only refuge from the unnamed and unnameable.